Greetings, fellow geeks! So, friend of the channel Tristan, better known as the martial arts film freak, sent me an amazing gift a while back of 5 different martial arts movies he wanted me to watch. Since I'm a terrible content creator, it didn't occur to me until recently that I could make a video out of that. But hey, better late than never. So, without any further ado, about half an hour into this movie, I was struggling with déjà vu, convinced that I must have seen this movie before. But as it turns out, I've just seen a lot of clips of it on Tristan's channel. Go figure. Anyway, My Father is a Hero is the kind of movie I think of when I think of a good old-fashioned Hong Kong kung fu crime drama. Hong Kong kung fu crime drama. That's actually really hard to say. Jet Li plays an undercover cop who can't tell his family what he's doing, and he is sent on a mission at the worst possible time because his wife is dying and his son is at a really tender age. As part of his cover story, he is arrested right in front of his family and quote-unquote escapes with his cellmate in order to get in with a gang. All while another cop, played by the late great Anita Mui, is on his trail, not knowing who he actually is. The most interesting thing about this movie is the character of his son, the precocious Johnny, who gets his own action scenes, including being a big part of the final fight. Which admittedly does get a little ridiculous when Jet Li's like throwing him around at the end of a rope and he's like kicking the bad guys, and it's very silly, but kind of in a good way. I kind of love it. The action scenes are good, but the cinematography does frustrate me. I have to admit that. The carefully crafted geometry of the scene just gets lost, through a lot of close-ups. And yeah, cutting away really, really quickly from here to here to here to here, you don't really get that good overview of the scene that you need in an action movie, right? But anyway, I should defer to Tristan on that. He's the expert. I'm just a casual, right? But as a drama, which, I can speak on that. As a drama, My Father is a Hero is surprisingly poignant. I'm not gonna lie, when the mother inevitably dies halfway through the movie, I do get a little bit eye-watery, I guess you'll say. One quirk that I think is funny is that all the good guys in this movie are terrible liars. All of them, even the kid, they're just constantly lying to each other. While all the bad guys are completely honest about their intentions. They never lie. It's really funny. I don't know if that's intentional, but I like it. Anyway, the movie really shines when it does get emotional. And for that reason, this might be one of my favorites of the movies Tristan sent me. I really do like it. I put this disc in my PS5 only knowing that this was a Jet Li movie from the early 90s in which he plays a Chinese folk hero. So naturally, I was expecting Once Upon a Time in China. That was probably a mistake. Sure, the two movies have a few things in common, but Legend is lighter, more of a comedy. And as a comedy, it gets pretty goofy, but the humor actually works on me because it never goes full screwball. Instead, and I know this might seem like a wild comparison, it's more like an early Shakespearean romance, like Comedy of Errors or As You Like It, something along those lines. There's cross-dressing, forced marriage plots, gross abuse of historical events, and a lot of mistaken identities, situational comedy, like Shakespearean farce. The basic plot is that, let's see if I can get this straight. Jet Li plays Fong apologies for my Chinese pronunciation, I can't help it. A sweet kid who happens to be a great fighter. He falls in love with the daughter of this new hood boss in town, Tiger Lu, and competes to win her hand in marriage. Antics ensue, some characters get swapped around, Tiger Lu's wife falls in love with Sai Yuk's mother, thinking she's actually his oldest brother, etc., etc., etc. You get the idea. But just when everything seems to be going well, we find out that Sai Yuk's father is a rebel spy carrying a list that is wanted by the Emperor and the Emperor's badass enforcer. The Governor of Nine Gates, I think. The last act does get a little serious and heavy with a couple of characters meet grisly ends. Sayuk's father almost gets executed, and, stuff like that. But the emotional stakes pay off because we've gotten invested in the more lighthearted bulk of the story. Like I said, it feels like a Shakespearean plot. As for the fight scenes, there are some good ones with Jet Li, especially an early one in which he and Tiger Lu's wife have a fight in which neither of them can actually touch the ground, so they wind up kicking each other while standing on top of the heads of the crowd. It's actually really fun. But I have to admit, the scene stealer of the movie is not Jet Li. It's actually, and again, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, it's actually Josephine Xiao, who plays the mother. She's absolutely incredible. And not just her fight scenes, which are also great, but also in her acting and in her comedic timing. She's the best thing about this movie, and I'll happily watch it again just for her. This one starts out like a typical kung fu movie from the 90s, kind of like another crime drama, like My Father is a Hero. There's an elite fighter who kind of sort of works with law enforcement to recover some stolen evidence that'll put away a gang boss, and he's got a friend in Greece being chased by the KGB of all people. Interpol is in the mix, and of course everybody knows kung fu for some reason. It is self-aware enough to laugh at itself, but the fight scenes are surprisingly competent, especially whenever Cynthia Rothrock or Richard Norton are on screen. And anybody who knows anything about kung fu should not be surprised by that. I'm no expert on martial arts. All I know, I've learned secondhand through my son's karate teacher, from watching these movies, and from listening to Tristan. But I do like how we see the fighters use a lot of traditional weapons, like katanas and sai. There's also one fun fight scene where the main character, played by Andy Lau, wields an umbrella and pays homage to Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. Where things go off the rails, though, is when we are finally introduced to the MacGuffin that everybody is fighting over. A psychic alien rock monster simply called the Jade. There's a kid, the nephew of the main guy, and he winds up in possession of it. Of course, the bad guys, led by Richard Norton, come knocking, but the movie is really busy having wacky antics. I'll admit I did chuckle a few times, but on the whole, the majority of the humor is, hey, look at this annoying person and watch as we do goofy things to him, like temporarily swap his hands and feet. I'm not as down on the humor as Tristan is in his review, but I definitely think it leans way too much in that screwball direction. It's not as good as Legend of Fong Sayuk. The last act has another sudden shift in which it suddenly turns into an Indiana Jones knockoff trying to be Crystal Skull before Crystal Skull even existed. And I will say it does have a more believable ancient alien than the one in that movie, because it looks like that papier-mâché one out of Mexico. The climactic final fight is pretty great, and on the whole, that would be the main reason I'd recommend this movie. I like the kung fu a lot. Everything else is just kind of weird, I guess. So, Undisputed. No, we're not talking about a Cody Rhodes documentary. We're talking about the Ving Rhames and Wesley Snipes prison boxing movie that I actually saw in theaters when it came out, but apparently I was one of the only people who saw it in theaters because it was a massive flop. I honestly barely remember it and had to watch a couple of recaps online to refresh my memory. But the bottom line is that it has some interesting ideas and some racial politics, but the final fight is meh, and there's a reason nobody really remembers it. The sequel, on the other hand, gives us Scott Adkins and Michael Jai White duking it out with mixed martial arts. The general plot setup is nearly identical to the first movie, only it removes the racial angle and sets the whole thing in a Siberian prison. As a matter of fact, given the recasting of Ving Rhames' character, this feels like a remake more than a sequel. And as a remake, it succeeds in taking a mediocre film and elevating it into something better. However, the story is still a little weak, especially at first, because none of the characters are all that likable or interesting until the final act. As a fight movie, it does have some great fights, but they are surprisingly scarce, with even the final fight being really short. But don't get me wrong, I could review this thing like a big budget Hollywood production and tell you all the things it does wrong, but it's a direct-to-video film. And by that standard, Undisputed II might as well be Citizen Kane. By the end, I did finally find myself connecting with the characters, especially the loosely defined villain, Boyka, played by Scott Adkins in a way that would launch his entire movie career. Therefore, knowing that he is the main character in Part 3, I was really excited to see where this story goes in the next one. So we pick up a few years after Part 2 with Boyka now scrubbing the prison toilets while another champion wows the Gen Pop. Word comes down that there is going to be an international prison fighter tournament, with the winner supposedly getting unconditional release. He montages his leg back into shape, for the most part, and defeats the champion in order to earn his spot in the tournament, where he has to face off with a bunch of different fighters from around the globe. Now, about halfway through this movie, I was all ready to give a review where I say, this is a better fight movie, but it is a weaker dramatic story, mostly because one of the main characters, Turbo, spends the majority of his time being completely insufferable, and the actor who plays him, Michael Jenkins, just isn't as good an actor as Michael Jai White. However, by the third act, the story takes some unexpected twists, Turbo becomes far more fun, and I found myself more invested than ever in where Scott Adkins' Boyka goes. I love that he still tries to sell himself as the most complete fighter, even though his knee will never be 100%, and you can see that deep down he knows it isn't entirely true. I do still have some nitpicks. The fight scenes are absolutely incredible, and the final fight is much, much better. But I'm not a big fan of the intermittent slow-mo and the quick zooms. You know the type, where something happens, the camera cuts to somebody's reaction, and it zooms into their face before zooming back out. It's just, it's obnoxious. It's early 2000s kind of stuff, and anyway. It's just annoying after a while, and that kind of thing is all over this movie, far more frequent than in the last one. So yeah, it took me a while to warm up to it, but by the end, I'm just gonna go ahead and say that Undisputed 3 is the best of the 5 movies I got from Tristan. It's not just my favorite, it's objectively the best, I think. And that's about it for today. Thank you once again to Tristan. Definitely go check out his channel, The Martial Arts Film Freak, if you haven't already. And as always, this is The Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, and have a good day.
扛几个吧。